Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Power Parsha Pearls. And here we are, next week, celebrating yet another Shavuot, commemorating the giving of the Torah at Sinai. As God spoke the Ten Commandments 3,336 years ago, there was this tremendous explosion, a theophany, if you like, that took place. Each of our ancestors were there personally, taking in the spiritual impact of the event. In fact, as our sages tell us, not just our ancestors, but each of our own souls were present, absorbing the experience into our psyche, integrating the divine event as an integral part of our own Jewish essence. It's the moment when Judaism as a religion was born, and we were then and there effectively declared God's chosen people and his ambassadors on earth to be trailblazers of morality to civilization. What does it mean to be a chosen people? On the festival itself, and like all festivals, we recite a paragraph which declares, Ata bechartanu mikol ha'amim, you have chosen us from amongst all the nations. But what does that mean? What does that responsibility entail? You know, that moment when we were chosen, when God gave the Torah at Sinai, we were told that the Jews were so overwhelmed that, to use the words of the Medrash, Parchan Nishmatan, their souls departed from them. And it took for angels to go and reconnect their souls with their bodies. What do you suppose was so overwhelming about the experience? Was it the fact that God was speaking? Was it the enormity of the task of embracing all the laws of the Torah? It was all that, but it was something more. Hasidic masters explain that when God spoke, he actually did so in the voice of each individual. That is to say, you heard God, but in your own voice. And that made everyone acutely aware of their innate godly potential. You see, when you come to discover that the power you have within you far exceeds the fabricated limitations of your own imagination, that's overwhelming. Because in that moment, you understand with every fiber of your being that, to borrow a cliche, with that great power comes great responsibility. But something more, something far more profound transpired at that moment at Sinai as well. And to appreciate that, let me take you on a little journey back to your past. You recall perhaps some years ago, there was an image of a dress that went viral because different people, even as they viewed the same dress, saw different colors, blue or yellow. The debate raged on for quite some time. In 2018, a similar phenomenon was replicated with a recording of a voice. Some 53% of over 500,000 respondents to a poll reported hearing the voice of the man saying the name Laurel, whilst 47% reported hearing the voice saying the name Yanni. You can look this up on YouTube, you'll find it. Who was right? Were half of us meshuggah? Were the other half meshuggah? Perhaps we're all crazy. Turns out, something of an explanation actually lies in the very Shavuot story. Because again, in recalling the giving of the Torah, as we read on Shavuot, we're given a detailed account of what transpired. And in the midst of this, it says, all the people saw the voices. That's what the Torah tells us. What does that mean? Said Rabbi Akiva on this verse, they saw what is normally heard. Well, what does that mean? For most of us, seeing sounds is not something we can experience, at least not when we're sober. It seems absurd to even imagine something like that. But one 16th century commentator observed that every word we utter, of course, produces sound waves. Usually, we lack the tools to detect the waves, but at Sinai, they indeed could see the physical manifestation of the sound in the air. Quite profound. 16th century commentator already observing that point. And what is it that the scientists did to solve the Laurel versus Yanni riddle? As it turns out, both names, they realized, were really mixed together. and were partially overlapping at different frequencies. Yani was detected by those who are more attuned to higher frequencies, whilst Laurel was more readily discernible to those who hear things at lower frequencies. Of course, that raises another question. Why do some people hear the higher and some people hear the lower? And why do some people hear both? So one suggestion was, well, it depended on what sort of listening equipment you were using. A second suggestion was to do with age. With age, after listening to many noises, some of our ear cells die and our brain can't always pick up higher frequencies. So younger people will hear the higher frequency, Yani, whilst older people will hear the lower frequency, Laurel. The problem with this is that notwithstanding whatever explanations, sometimes you had two people of identical age and noise life experience listening to the same thing on the same device, and yet still they hear two different things. How do you explain that? And you know what? You don't. It's a mystery. Your brain at every moment makes the unconscious decision to tune into certain frequencies and tune out other ones. And that's unique to you. Some brains detect one dimension of reality, whilst another brain might detect a different dimension. That's just the way it is. But I need you to think about this for a second. The distinction between reality and perception. The same physical sound is going into everyone's ears, but we hear completely different words. My brain tells me he said one thing. Your brain tells you he said something completely different. So who's right? Guess what? We're both right from the perspective of each of our brains. And what a lesson in life that is. What you told your husband and what he heard are not always the same thing. What you tell your wife and what she hears are often opposite messages. What you might be communicating to a colleague or an employee and what they're actually hearing you saying may not be anything comparable to what it is that you intended to say. What I tell my child and what he or she heard me say can be very different. And that's the way it is in so many of our interactions, which is why I have to always have sufficient humility to understand not just what I'm saying, but to also learn what the other person is hearing, what the other person is experiencing, which then challenges us to consider, can you muster the courage to tune in to another person's frequency? And even if you can't, can you at least have the integrity to understand that there is another frequency and that other people are hearing different things based on their brain and their life experience? Do you know how many relationships would be saved if Yani and Laurel could at least understand each other, even if they can't agree? How many general disagreements could be avoided between people if only I can appreciate that your perception of exactly the same reality is completely different than my own? Saul joined Frank for dinner after work. He observed how Frank went straight to his wife, gave her a hug, told her how much he missed her whilst he was at work. And when it was time for supper, he complimented her on the cooking. And when dinner was over, he gave her a peck on the cheek and told her, "Thank you so much. I love you." And Saul says, "Wow, I'm impressed. You're married 20 years and you fuss so much over your wife." And Stephen explains, actually, a marriage counselor advised it. I started it 6 months ago and it has made such a difference. You should try it too. So Saul goes home that night and he bought his wife a beautiful bunch of roses and he gave her a massive hug and he handed her a box of chocolates and he told her, "I love you." And she burst into tears and he says, "What's wrong?" She says, "It's the worst day of my life. First, our little Joshua fell off his bike and I had to take him to the hospital. Then the washing machine broke. My mother called me and rambled on that I don't care about her. And now you come home from work clearly completely drunk." No two shared experiences are the same. No two results are the same. Do you know why God enabled the Jews to see the sounds at Sinai? They could see the sound waves. They could see why some people would hear Yani and others would hear Laurel. You see, the Torah was given in order to perpetuate peace in the world. We say it every time we return the Torah back into the ark. Its ways are the ways of pleasantness, and all of its direction is peace. And the only way there can be real peace is if I can appreciate the many diverse frequencies in which different brains experience different realities and address each person according to his or her frequency. You may have heard, being maybe to the Blind Museum in Israel. I was there in 2019 with my siblings for my mother's 80th birthday. And I walked away with an extraordinary perspective. The museum is entirely black. You literally feel like you're blind. You hobble your way through many different rooms with a walking stick, and slowly you learn to rely on all of your senses to direct you. There's the rocking boat, there's the smell of seawater, there's the stumble of a lurking step. It was terrifying at first, to say the least, and I felt acutely more vulnerable and insecure. There were other people in our group apart from us four. There was that moment when my younger sister said, "Yitzchak, I'm going to hold your hand," as she grabbed for it, only to hear my voice some distance away saying, "I don't think I'm next to you." And then she then yelped loudly when realizing she grabbed the hand of some stranger. And consistently throughout this tour, I subconsciously learned to drown out all the voices around me and train my ears to listen to the one voice I trusted to guide me to safety, namely that of our tour guide, Yaniv. You see, Yaniv was really blind. He had personal experience of how to navigate life as a blind person. And he was the one guiding us blind visitors through the museum. He guided us everywhere into this so-called shuk with a wide array of smells, then the music room where we all sat on the floor doing nothing but listening to Mozart compositions, where in the absence of sight, sound and vibration on the floor became more acute. The last room in the museum was the cafe, where we ordered snacks, made our way to a table, groped our way around chairs, and finally settled in for what was going to be a fascinating chance to ask our guide anything. And he shared with us his life story and what it was like to never see a sunset, to ever see his own loved ones, the challenges of navigating through life. It was quiet. All you heard was the ruffling of snacks being opened. And then I asked a question, and Yaniv responded by asking me first, "Yitzchak, why aren't you relaxing? Sit back, be more comfortable." I was flabbergasted. Even I didn't realize I was sitting upright and uptight. "How do you know? You can't see me. It's dark, you're blind." And I'll never forget his response, ever. "Habibi, I don't have to see you to feel you." And I was moved by the uniqueness of this special man, his warmth, his sensitivity, his depth. What an incredible individual, and what a daunting reality of the life he lives. And then we were back in the light, and I saw him. His eyes were half open, fluttering jarringly. His clothes were slightly disheveled. The perception I had of him in the darkness was gone, stolen even in the reality of the light. I'm embarrassed to admit I was somewhat disappointed. The way he looked wasn't quite the way I imagined him. But which was right? Which was true? What my brain knew, or what my eyes were now seeing? The fact is, as long as I could not see, I actually saw. When I started to see, I became blind. Think about that. Before, I was relying on a deeper level of perception and consciousness, where I was transcending my judgments and short-sightedness to see, to really see the other person. Once my eyes adjusted, so did my reactions to some superficial reality. And the message of Shavuot is that they saw the sound. First, know that no two perceptions are the same. Even if you can't see things from another person's perspective, have enough humility to respect that there is another perspective. And second, just because I can't see you doesn't mean I can't feel you. Don't be blinded by what you see. If we can all learn to get past our short-sightedness and really feel the other person, then frankly, we would all see the light, and we would all see the enduring beauty as God had always intended in this beautiful world. Wishing you a Shabbat Shalom, and indeed already a Chag